Hi, and welcome back to the Unseen Podcast, a podcast dedicated to missing people, unresolved cases, and UK true crime. Today we're exploring the case of the disappearance of 13-year-old April Fabb in Norfolk in 1969. Last episode, we discussed the disappearance of Genette Tate in Aylesbury in Devon and the baffling circumstances surrounding it. April's disappearance, while almost 10 years prior, is often linked to Genette's due to the similarities between the two. This episode contains descriptions that some listeners may find distressing, so listener discretion is advised. The village of Metton is located in the county of Norfolk and is dominated by rolling countryside and its local parish church of St Andrew. Metton is a small village with few residents. An article from 1969 states that there were just 57 residents. There are several other villages in the vicinity, such as Roughton, around 1.5 miles away. Just less than 4 miles away lies the seaside town of Cromer, on the north coast of the county. Cromer is a tourist destination and is known for its beautiful coastline and for the famous crab that the local fishermen catch and bring back to its shores. Metton was where April Fabb was born in 1955, and she grew up during the 50s and 60s. She lived with her father Ernest and her mother Olive, along with her pet dog, a Cairn Terrier named Trudy. She had grown up with her sisters Pamela and Diane, and the family lived at number 3 council houses opposite the old rectory, where it is reported that Olive helped out. As Metton was such a small place, everyone knew each other, and therefore several people described what April was like. They all described her as quiet and shy, and her timidness was obvious to anyone who spoke to her. A schoolteacher of April's talked about her in the Daily Mirror, stating, "She never uses 2 words where 1 will do." Her family have added to this in other statements, saying she was a steady girl, and the image that is conjured up of April was someone who kept to herself, but was reliable and friendly with those that she knew. She enjoyed stamp collecting, needlework, and music, with Top of the Pops being her favourite TV show. She was also a huge animal lover. In the month of April 1969, April Fabb was 13 years old and was on holiday from school. She attended Cromer Secondary School and was enjoying her holidays in Metton with her family. Like most children during the school holidays, April was looking for things to do with her days, as that month they were having some nice warm weather. On April the 8th, this was exactly what April was doing, and for the most part the day started off as it normally would do. We have quite a detailed description of April's day, as her family spoke to the Daily Mirror newspaper and established a timeline of what happened. April's mother Olive stated that around 9:20 a.m. she went over to the rectory where she worked. When she left, April was still in bed. Around 10:10 a.m, Olive returned home where she saw April. By that time she'd got dressed. She was wearing brown slacks and a green jumper. Olive went back to work, and around 12:20 she returned home, and just a few minutes later April returned too, after taking Trudy the dog for a walk. About 20 minutes later, at around 12:40, Olive said that Mrs. Dixon, who was a friend of the family, stopped by the house with a note. April was meant to be going on a shopping trip with her daughter Susan. The note, however, stated that this trip was off and she couldn't go. Olive recalled that April was upset about this and had some tears in her eyes, as she'd really wanted to go. Mrs. Dixon brought a packet of 10 cigarettes with her to the house as well, which she left there. April had plans to give these cigarettes to her brother-in-law Bernard, who was married to her older sister Pam. It had been his birthday the Sunday before, and April wanted to give them to him as a gift. Olive stated, April had bought him some sweets, but she ate them because she loves sweets, so she had to buy him something else. She had settled on the cigarettes. Seeing that April was upset about the shopping trip, Olive suggested that she phone her friend Gillian to see if she wanted to go. April did this and took off on her bike to ring Gillian, and when she returned she was in a happier mood. Gillian had said that she would go shopping with her one Saturday. April then asked her mum what she could do with the rest of her day, and Olive suggested that she take the present to Bernard that afternoon. April agreed and went upstairs to get changed. She came back down wearing a red pair of woolen culottes, which have also been described in some articles as a skirt. She'd made these herself, and she had on the same green jumper. She had also put on white long bobby socks as her mother described, with slip-on Scholl brand sandals with wooden soles, red straps and brass buckles. She had also put a brown bow in her hair. It appeared that April had wanted to dress up a little bit, and perhaps even look a little bit more grown up for her trip, as Olive said. She had on white bobby socks, which she wouldn't even normally wear for school. She feels too grown up. April got on her bicycle and set off to her sister's house, which was in Roughton, around 1.5 miles away. It was around 1:40 p.m. and her mother saw her off. Just after she left home, she encountered 2 friends at a field next to Harrison's farm on Cromer Road in Metton. Christine Dixon and Maureen Hweck, both 12, were playing in the field with a donkey named Judy. April stopped for around 10 minutes to talk to the 2 girls. Christine later explained. April walked us around for a bit, and then she had to be off to Pam's. April set back off again on her bike, and just after 2 p.m, at around 2:06, she was spotted again, this time just down the lane near Pillbox Crossroads. Joseph Livingston Brown, a tractor driver, and several other people who were with him noticed her riding her bicycle. Just under 10 minutes later, it's reported that 3 men who were working on ordnance surveys spotted a blue and white bicycle in Three Corner Field, which was just 150 yards from Pillbox Crossroads, where April had last been seen. This didn't alert them to anything that was wrong, and they drove on thinking nothing of it. They, however, were not the only people to have spotted the bicycle. About 45 minutes after the workers had spotted the bike, another man also saw it. David Empson was driving past the area taking his mother home when he noticed it in the field. He decided to go and take a look, and he could see that there was a saddlebag attached to it with items in. This seemed strange to David, and he took the bike to the police house in Roughton and gave it in to the local police constable. It was now around 3:30 p.m. Police Constable Derek Chittock looked through the bag and he found several items: a packet of 10 cigarettes, a blue handkerchief, and a 5p halfpenny. He looked the bike over and noticed that the bell on it was dented. While the discovery of the bike in the field was odd, it didn't raise too many alarm bells. There could have been plenty of reasons why it had been left there. For April's parents, however, something wasn't right. It was now late afternoon, and they decided to go ahead and have their tea without April. In fact, they were slightly annoyed that April wasn't back, as they assumed she'd decided to have tea at Pam's without telling them. By 7 p.m, however, Olive was concerned, despite April's father saying that he still thought Bernard would bring her back when they were done. Olive didn't agree with this though, and at 8:30 she set off on her own bike to Pam's to see what was going on. Olive said she couldn't stand it any longer. The journey only took her around 15 minutes, and when she arrived at Pam's house, she was told that April had never arrived there. Her concerns had been well founded. Where was April? It was now almost 9 hours since she'd left the house, and she had still not returned. At 10 p.m, Olive and Ernest contacted the police to tell them that April was missing. They were just as concerned with the disappearance as her parents were. By this point, it was clear that the bike found in the field was April's, and the scene indicated something sinister. It didn't take long for officers to suspect that she may have been abducted while riding her bike. In the early hours of the 9th of April, officers were being brought in to work the case, including Detective Chief Superintendent Reginald Lester, who was the most senior detective in Norfolk at the time. The immediate action was to search for April in the area where her bike was found and where they knew she was travelling. The timeline was crucial for trying to find out what could have happened. When witnesses were found, it was clear that there was a very narrow window when April must have disappeared. She was spotted at 2:06, and then the bike was seen just 9 minutes later by the Ardent survey workers. It looked as though the bike had been thrown over a 6-foot bank from the lane where April had been riding and landed in the field. This may have explained the dent in the bicycle bell. These 9 minutes were so important to the investigation. I'm so happy that Podcorn is returning as the sponsor of this episode. Podcorn is a marketplace which connects podcasters to amazing podcast sponsorship opportunities like host-read ads, interview segments, topical discussions, and lots more. I've used Podcorn for over a year now, and I have so many positive things to say about it. I've enjoyed working with lots of different and diverse brands, and I've also discovered so many new businesses and products that I love. With Podcorn, you have complete control over the sponsorships and adverts that appear on your podcast, and this is something that I really wanted to make sure of. Their mission is to provide podcasters with complete transparency when monetizing, and being able to make creative choices and have autonomy is so important to me, and is one of the reasons that I'm still really enjoying using the platform. You can set your own rates and are able to speak to companies directly about what they want from your advertising campaign. The staff are also really helpful and are there to support you and help you be properly compensated for your work. I can't recommend it enough, so head over to the link in my show notes to visit the Podcorn website and start browsing opportunities and sponsorships now. The police were aware of how important finding April quickly would be, so for this reason, Detective Chief Superintendent Lester brought in a huge arsenal of resources. 40 officers were brought in to search Metton, as well as every police dog that the county had. This presence in the village almost doubled its population, and it was clear that the investigation was a serious one. An RAF helicopter was also brought in to search the area where April had last been seen. Locals and volunteers got involved with the search, many combing the fields around the lane. April's parents appealed to anyone that might have seen her to come forward, and a description of her was issued to the press. Everyone was looking for the young girl with light brown hair and blue eyes that had disappeared in just 9 minutes while riding her bike. It seemed like an unbelievable story, but to April's family and the village of Metton, it was the reality. The appeals and press coverage did bring in some tips, and as the investigation went into its second day, people did report some interesting finds to the police. Some possible sightings of her were reported, some of which took place on trains. 2 train passengers thought they had spotted April on the 3:58 p.m. train from Cromer to North Walsham on the day she disappeared. Another passenger said they saw someone fitting her description at North Walsham platform at 6:15 p.m. that same day. The police addressed these sightings and did travel to speak to train passengers to see what else they could find out. They made a statement saying, "Although this does not tie in with April's bicycle being found in a field near her home, it is a ray of hope, and we are following it up." Another tip came in about a bloody handkerchief that had been found with the letter A embroidered onto it. Another witness remembered seeing a speeding van in the area at around the time that April went missing. Detectives early on in the investigation did appeal for a man seen resting in a cream or fawn-coloured Ford Consul or Vauxhall Cresta to come forward. He was parked near to where April had last been seen, and he was reportedly lay across both front seats, with his feet sticking out of an open door. They also looked into a tip that came in about 2 youths who were seen driving through Metton in a battered black minivan, which appeared to have the door handles missing. All of these tips were looked into and they were discounted by the police. They had tracked down as many leads as possible, and many of the drivers in the area that day had alibis, and there was no reason to believe that any of them had anything to do with April's disappearance. The sightings on the train didn't lead anywhere and didn't fit with the timeline. A woman had also come forward to say that she had used the handkerchief on her son's grazed knee and that it had nothing to do with April. They had still not found her or had any idea as to what may have happened. Detectives continued to do everything they could to try and track her down, including showing a group of children footage of April at a residential course from the year before. A police officer said, "We don't know if this film will help at all, but we're doing everything we can think of to turn up a possible lead." It was clear that there was a huge lack of evidence and the police were struggling to come up with anything. The fact they hadn't found her body, however, did give the police and her family some hope that she might be alive somewhere. The idea that she might have run away and now couldn't face coming back due to the publicity was something detectives mulled over. This was quickly discounted, however, as a theory, as there was no evidence that April had ever wanted to run away, and she had never done anything like that in the past. The police were quite sure from the beginning of the investigation that April had been abducted, and with every day that passed, the concern for her grew. The local community came together by praying for April, giving her family their kind words, and some putting money together for a reward for any information. Theories about who could have abducted her and where she was now also was being discussed by the locals, and her disappearance scared everyone. She had disappeared in the afternoon in a village with just over 50 people in it. How had it happened, and how had she not been found? Police continued to canvass the area, search the fields, and anywhere she could be concealed, but they had no leads and no luck. Days and then weeks passed, and despite the huge efforts put in trying to find her, she was still missing. It's reported in June 1969 that detectives had already taken 1,517 statements, and they hadn't discovered anything that could help. In September of that year, 5 months had already gone by, and still no sign of April. Newspapers reported on the fact that Dutch parapsychologist Gerard Croiset had been contacted by a BBC News programme in relation to April's case. As we saw almost 10 years later with Genette Tate's disappearance, Croiset worked as a clairvoyant and was thought to be a useful tool in many missing person cases worldwide. Croiset sent sketches of some of the areas that Norfolk police might find some information related to April's disappearance. He had also had a vision about a man who was about 48 years old with a rifle and a 3-year-old Alsatian dog. As well as this, he made a drawing of a church that was located near an ice cream parlour and a rifle shop. Croiset made the journey from his home in Utrecht in the Netherlands to Norfolk to help police in their investigation. He spent 2 days with a senior detective, and when he arrived in the town of Aylsham, just over 8 miles away from Metton, Croiset reportedly had something to say. He stated, "This is the place I saw in my vision. The man who took April away uses this rifle shop." He also commented as he was leaving the UK, "I see a possibility that within a short time the girl will be found because of what I have said." Croiset may have been confident about the information that he provided to police, however it didn't progress their investigation. April was still not found, and they didn't find any new evidence in relation to her case as a result of what Croiset had said. It was as though there were no traces of April anywhere, and detectives had exhausted all of the possible leads that they could. Years passed, and during the 1970s there were several newspaper articles highlighting a number of baffling disappearances that had happened over the years. One that was always referred to was April Fabb. April's parents spoke to the press about her disappearance, saying that they never gave up hope of finding her. They said, "Time is supposed to be a great healer, but we shall now never rest until we know the truth." Detective Chief Superintendent Reginald Lester also spoke to the press about the investigation. He said that they seemed to be as far off as ever of finding out what happened, and appealed to the public. He said, "For the sake of parents everywhere whose child may be missing, this case can never be closed." Unfortunately, April would become another name on the list of the long-term missing over the years, and articles and TV programmes were made about her disappearance, but nothing that could aid the investigation. After Genette Tate went missing in 1978, April's name would often pop up in relation to the similarities between the two disappearances, and they have been linked together ever since. Both girls had been riding their bikes along country lanes in rural locations and had disappeared just minutes after speaking to friends. In both cases, only their bike and possessions had been left behind. Both were 13 years old, and both had not necessarily planned to do what they were doing that day. Genette was covering someone else's paper round, and April had been planning to go on a shopping trip, which didn't end up happening. It's clear to see why Genette and April's cases are often talked about together. Decades had gone by, and in the 90s, another discovery put April's case back into the headlines. Robert Black was convicted for the murder of 3 children in 1994 and another, Jennifer Cardy, in 2009. This news was huge for police, who now had to consider whether Robert Black could have been involved with any other cases of missing children. Black was known to travel all over the country with his job as a truck driver, and police had put him at the abduction sites through receipts from his employer. Following his convictions, Black was now at the forefront of everyone's minds in relation to many other cases, and forces got together to try and figure out if he were a suspect. April and Genette's disappearances were never far from people's minds, and now that there was a possible viable suspect, it gave family and friends some hope after all these years. One sighting that stands out to me is the van seen speeding through Metton at the time of April's disappearance. Black was known to drive a van, and used one in some of his abductions. Unfortunately, despite the feeling that Black may have been involved in her disappearance, the police were unable to find any links between him and Norfolk at the time that she vanished. Even though no connections have been made, people still continue to think that Black is the primary suspect in her disappearance. After Black's conviction, April's case again lay cold, as it had done since 1969. In 2010, police excavated a well close to Metton, as a landowner told them that he'd seen some black plastic sheeting at the bottom of it, close to the time that April disappeared. In 2011, a man came forward with information that he saw a man digging a grave near to the area on Easter weekend in 1969. This lead also did not provide police with any new information or evidence. Today, April's case is in the hands of Detective Chief Inspector Andy Guy, the cold case manager at Norfolk Constabulary. He has learned April's case inside out, and is still dedicated to trying to find out what happened to her. Evidence that had been collected from the scene is still in storage, and police do still have it in case something more can be done with it. When asked what he thinks happened to April, he told the BBC that he thinks that she was abducted either by a predator that was passing through Metton or by a local who they haven't managed to track down. He stated, talking about the initial investigation, there were very few lines of inquiry to go on. It was very different back then because all they had was the witnesses. He explained that he believes that the answer may lie with the local community, saying, "I think there's something. In 1969, I don't think we totally exhausted those inquiries. When you look at things with a modern mindset, there are still things that we didn't get to the bottom of." Sadly, April's parents have passed away without knowing what happened to their daughter. Her father died in 1998 and her mother in 2013. They never did find out where April went that day, and they never found her. This has caused untold anguish to their family, particularly for their sisters who still live close by to the area today. Maurice Mawson, the detective who was in charge of the investigation in 1983 and since retired, wrote a book about April, The Lost Years, the story of April Fabb. He told the BBC in 2019, April would have been 64 this month. She would probably have been a grandmother. To find out what happened now would probably cause fresh anguish for the family, to think that the father and mother never knew. But the objective is to find the truth. Will we ever find it? I don't know. April's cousin Rosemary also made a statement about her case, saying, "Why was nothing found is what I ask." She talked to her friends at the end of the road before she went up. It's an absolute mystery, isn't it? If they find anything, that would be marvellous, but I can't think that after all this time they will. I don't think anybody will ever know. As far as the family are concerned, the mum and dad have gone, and we just want it to be left now. Every time it's brought up, you live through it all again. Again, this is something that's often stated in cold cases, and the feeling that they will never be solved is such a sad and tragic thought. April's headstone, which was paid for from the proceeds of Maurice Mawson's book, stands outside the church that she used to visit regularly in the village that she lived in. It's a sombre reminder to the local community that she's still missing, and that the mystery still continues. Andy Guy is appealing to the public for any information that they might have, and Norfolk Constabulary have not given up on trying to solve April's case. If you know anything about the disappearance of April Fabb in 1969, please contact Andy Guy on 01953 423819, or you can email unsolvedcasereviews@norfolk.pnn.police.uk. You can also contact Crime Stoppers anonymously on 0800 555 111. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I want to thank Podcom for sponsoring the episode today. The link to the website is in the show notes where you can start browsing sponsorship opportunities now. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can do on Patreon, where I upload early access episodes along with bonus episodes, stickers and shoutouts. The link is in the show notes. You can also help the podcast by giving us a review wherever you listen, or by following us on social media at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or on YouTube. I would love to hear what you think about this episode or any of our other episodes. If you have any suggestions for cases close to you or ones that you think I should cover, you can email me at theunseenpod@gmail.com, or you can message me on social media. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to having you back next time. As always, I'm Caprice, and this has been Unseen.